Hello everyone, I welcome you all to the fourth episode of the questionnaire series. In today's episode, we'll be discussing about the next set of questions that can help in enhancing our ABAP knowledge. So these are the five questions that we'll be dealing in today's episode. Significance of enhancement category in tables, key events of classical reports in ABAP, significance of classical report events and their flow, T code to debug a job in SAP, T code to trigger debugging at any instant. Now, let us move on to the answers without wasting any time. Each of the questions I'll be discussing about the practical part of it as well. So let's go to the first question. Significance of enhancement category in tables. So enhancement of a table is basically defined by this enhancement category option that we choose during the table creation. There is also a possibility wherein through this enhancement category, we also control the data type of the fields that are added. In other words, the data type of the fields that can be added as part of the enhancement. And this enhancement category is very critical that we choose the right option during the table creation. Now let's move on to the system to have a hands-on view. Now this is one of the custom tables that I've created. So enhancement category is basically defined here in extras enhancement category, and this is where we define the enhancement category. So based upon the option we choose, the ability for us to enhance the table. For example, if cannot be enhanced is chosen, we cannot add any new fields to the table. How do we add new fields to the table? Through append structure and other enhancement techniques for a table. So when this cannot be enhanced is used, we cannot add any fields. When can be enhanced character like is used, only character fields can be added as part of the enhancement. And when can be enhanced character like or numeric is used, both the character and the numeric fields can be added. And the can be enhanced deep option defines the deep structures that can be added as part of the enhancement. The detailing of this enhancement category, I have discussed it in another episode. Will provide the respective link in the description. Please go through that to have a clear-cut understanding of this enhancement category. So for now, as I told before, enhancement category helps us in understanding the enhancement options that are available for a table. Let's move on to the next question. Key events of classical reports in ABAP. And let's see together both the questions like key events of classical reports in ABAP, significance of classical report events and their flow. Now, the same events that are here is discussed in detail here. So basically load of program, this is an implicit event that is being called in a program, and initialization is the initial event that gets triggered before the screen is displayed. All variables initialization can be written here. At selection screen output, it helps in preparing the screen. Usually it gets triggered every time before the screen is displayed. At selection screen is to validate the data in the screen. Start of selection is the default event that gets triggered when none of the other events are defined explicitly. In absence of selection screen, this is the first event that gets triggered. End of selection, the last event that gets triggered before the report is displayed. So these are some of the key events, and on the right side you can see the significance of the same. Now I'll show you some hands-on for you. Now for example, this is one of the simple report that I have created. Okay, so here let me put a breakpoint at each point. Okay, now okay, now as I execute, before the selection screen is displayed, you see the event initialization is getting triggered. So this is the first event that gets triggered before the selection screen is loaded. Now the next event is at selection screen output. So the at selection screen output is basically the only event that gets triggered whenever a screen is being prepared for display. So before a screen is prepared for display, the at selection screen output will be the immediate event that's called before. Now after this I press F8, my selection screen will get displayed. Now whenever I do a change in the selection screen, automatically my at selection screen will first get triggered because I have done an operation on my screen, and the system understands that it has to validate the data that is part of the screen even though the data is empty, or if I enter any data. On both cases, system consider the value of the field to hold some data and it starts to validate the same. After that, when I proceed, it will again call back the at selection screen output because my screen is about to be displayed again. Though I have changed the radio button, The end result of my operation or the end result of my selection of radio button is nothing but the screen is getting displayed again. So whenever the screen is getting displayed, as I told you, the immediate event that gets called before is at selection screen output. Correct? Now that selection gets now the selection screen gets displayed. Now when I input a certain value, what happens is again, my at selection screen gets displayed, but this time my at selection screen output will not be displayed because the end result of my operation is the display screen, right? It's not the selection screen anymore. So henceforth, my at selection screen output may not be called this time. Wherever my data gets validated at the at selection screen event and the control moves on to select start of selection. Here my data gets fetched, and then before my data is getting displayed, my end of selection is triggered. So this is the basic flow and the significance of each of the event. As I told you before, now when I come back, again the initialization event gets loaded, and since my selection screen is going to get displayed, my at selection screen output will again be called. Okay, now I'm going to show you something different here. As I told you, load of program is one of the initial event that gets implicitly called. So let me call the load of program here, load of program. Okay, I'll simply write a sample code here. Wait for 1 second. Okay, like I'll simply write a sample code here. Wait up to 1 second. Okay, I'll write a sample code here and let me activate it, and let me place a breakpoint now on the revised lines. Okay, uh, let me go back and come into the screen again. Okay, now I have the breakpoints loaded. Okay, let me reload it again, breakpoints on all the events, and now we will see the flow. As I told you, load of program is an implicit event, so it should be called first. Let's check. I'm executing. You see, my load of program is the first implicit event that gets called. Now as I proceed, the rest of the events are the same flow that we have seen in the previous cycle. Okay, so as I told you before, the key events of a classical report are load of program, initialization, at selection screen, output at selection screen, start of selection, end of selection, and the significance and the flow has been just discussed. Let's proceed further. The fourth question for today's episode is T code to debug a job in SAP. Now, JDBG is the T code to be used for debugging jobs. Significance of JDBG depends on the job status. I'll explain you during the practical session. Basic debugging knowledge, of course, yes, your individual debugging knowledge plays a vital role in debugging the jobs effectively. Now, just for an example, so these are all the jobs that are present. So all I have to do is just place the cursor on the job that I want to debug, go to your command bar and type jdbg and press enter. So as soon as you press enter, you will have the debugging screen that gets triggered. Now, based upon your knowledge, or in other words, based upon your debugging skill, you can proceed further from here. These all may look like the breakpoint that we have placed for the previous question. Let me remove all these breakpoints and I'll save it. I'll execute it. Now again, I'll do the process again. I'll place the cursor here and I'll type jdbg and I'll press enter. You see my breakpoint gets triggered immediately, and it goes to the immediate execution line of the program. Now, since I have written a load of program, as I told you, load of program is the initial implicit event that gets called during execution of any report. So, when a report is being scheduled as a job and you are trying to debug a job, by default, load of program is the first event that gets called. So, as soon as I'm triggering the JDBG T code for the particular job, the event gets triggered. Now, what I told you before, the JDBG has its significance depends on the status of the job. You cannot apply JDBG on an active job. Okay, when you place a breakpoint JDBG on an active job, it will explicitly throw an error message. Unfortunately, in this demo, I don't have an active job through which I can explain this. However, I will provide you a link where I have discussed in detail about the significance of JDBG on each status of the job. Now, moving on to the next question, how can you trigger the debugging at any instant? Yes, /h is the command to trigger. Now, how do we do that? Now, imagine this is the program that I want to debug. Okay, as you can see, I don't have any breakpoints that's placed. If I execute this, and if I simply execute this, it will display all the values, right? Now, if I want to trigger a breakpoint, or if I want to trigger the debugging tool at any instant, all I have to do is go to this command bar and type /h. It will give you a notification that debugging is switched on in the bottom. And as soon as you press the next action from that point, irrespective of the action that you do, whether it is an execute, enter, or whether it is a change in the radio button, or whatever action you perform on the screen, the debugger tool gets triggered. So from here, again, based upon the individual debugging knowledge, you can debug further. And this debugging /ht code is also very helpful in debugging your pop-up screens. How do you debug the pop-up screens? As soon as your pop-up screen appears, all you have to do is you have to prepare a file like this where you are explicitly mentioning the command is /h. Okay, and all you have to do is drag the file and place it on the pop-up. This sequence is also explained in one of my video. The corresponding link will be provided as part of the description. Basically, each of the questions that we have discussed today has a separate video for each of the question. I have explained it through a separate episode of different playlist. I will provide all those links for your reference in the description. Please go through it and get an extensive knowledge. I hope today's question helped you in enhancing your ABAP knowledge further. I see you all soon with other episodes, interesting questions that can be discussed and enhance your ABAP skill. Thank you, peace, and blessings to everyone.